Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on sustainable recreation, how to get an economic boost while protecting and preserving the environment. My name is Melissa Keene. I'm a Senior Program Manager with the Institute for Local Government, and I will be your host and moderator this morning. Just a quick overview of what we're going to cover today. So we have just some quick welcoming remarks, and then we're going to set the context for today's conversation and talk about some of the economic impacts of recreation. And then we're going to go into two examples from Mono County and the town of Mammoth Lakes. We'll then go into a panel discussion with all of our panelists to dig into some of this content a little bit more, and then wrap up with audience Q&A and then some additional resources for you all. So you've probably noticed that your line is muted, and you will be muted for the duration of today's webinar, but that doesn't mean you can't ask us questions. So in your control panel, you should see a box that says questions. Feel free to click into there and type questions into us at any point during the webinar. We will try to do clarifying questions and logistical questions as they come in. And then if you have content-related questions, we will be taking as many of those as we can during the Q&A portion towards the end of today's call. So a little bit about ILG in case you aren't familiar with us before we jump in. We are the nonprofit affiliate of the League of California Cities, the California State Association of Counties, and the California Special Districts Association. So we work together with our affiliate organizations to help provide practical and easy-to-use resources so that you all as local agencies can effectively implement policies on the ground. We do this in a number of ways. We do a lot of education and training like today's webinar, but we also have gone back to in-person training. We do conference sessions, a number of things in that space. We provide technical assistance and capacity building services for local governments, as well as help be a convener and facilitator for conversations. We focus on four main program areas, what we call leadership and governance. So that's some of the basics information, how to work together as a council and board, how to work with your staff, how to be an effective team, as well as some of the ethics training requirements that you all are mandated to take. In addition to that, we have a program on civics education and workforce. So that's trying to help create the pipeline to public service, really get young folks interested in local government as a career path. And then recently working with local agencies on challenges around retention and recruitment and some other things in that space. We also have a program dedicated to public engagement. So that is really helping local agencies embed public engagement into their operations, being more strategic and thoughtful and proactive about that process. And we have resources and training, everything from getting started to dealing with difficult meeting participants to using technology and navigating this virtual and hybrid engagement space that we are still in. And then lastly, we also have a program focused on sustainable and resilient communities. So that's where this webinar fits in, but we're also doing a lot of work around housing and land use, climate resilience and adaptation, and a number of other things there. So definitely encourage you to check out our website if you're not familiar with us and see some of the resources and trainings that we have available to you all. I want to quickly introduce our presenters today. So we are joined by Dana Stroud, who's the Regional Community-Based Solutions Manager from the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, also known as GoBiz. We have Bob Gardner, who's the County Supervisor in Mono County, and John Wentworth, who is the Mayor Pro Tem in the town of Mammoth Lakes, but is also the convener and facilitator for the Eastern Sierra Sustainable Recreation Partnership. Would love to just get a sense of who's joining us in the room today. So we've got two quick polling questions that I'm going to put up just to hear a little bit from all of you. So first, I will get this launched. We are wondering, what type of agency are you with? Are you with a city, county, a special district, a nonprofit, or perhaps another type of agency? We'll give that just a few seconds. 75% of you have voted, so maybe just a few more seconds here. Okay, I'm going to close this and share that information out. So it looks like about 40% are with cities, about 20% with counties, a handful of folks with special districts and nonprofits, and then quite a few folks from that other category. And then one other quick polling question for you guys. We're also curious, what part of the state are you in? Are you in the North State, the Central Valley, maybe the Central Coast, or the Sierras, or Southern California? And I know those are really big regions, but we were limited on our number of responses we could put in. So just wanted to get kind of a quick assessment. Okay, just a couple more seconds here. Almost everybody, so I'm going to go ahead and close this and again share. So almost 40% in the North State, Northern California, about 11% in the Central Valley, 12% from the Central Coast, a good chunk of our John and Bob's colleagues in the Sierras, and then another 25% or so from Southern California. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's definitely helpful as we go into the rest of today's conversation. So up first, I'm going to turn it over to Dana, who's going to, again, give us some context about the economic implications of sustainable recreation. So Dana, can I go ahead and turn it over to you?
Thanks, Melissa, and I appreciate that you're going to drive my slides today, so thank you for the assistance on that. And also apologies if there's any background noise. I'm in Sacramento in a hotel room right now, and there's a little bit of construction apparently going on, so apologies if that's a distraction. But good morning, and I'm really excited to be here, Melissa, and thank you for the opportunity to actually join today's webinar and be a part of this discussion. I'm currently based in Paso Robles, California, there in the Central Coast, covering the Central California region for GoBiz, and that includes the Central Coast, Central Valley, Central Sierra, and over into the Eastern Sierra. And within those counties and that area, outdoor recreation is a significant part of life, but it's also a significant part of those regions and those communities' economic resilience and economic vitality. So I want to just talk a little bit this morning about GoBiz and what we do, and then talk a little bit about the economic impact of recreation in California, so we can go to the next slide and move forward on that one. So for those of you not familiar with the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, or what we affectionately know as GoBiz, we are basically the one-stop shop for economic development in the state of California. We cover a variety of areas and geographies and responsibilities, quite frankly, here as it relates to economic growth in California. We can go next. This next slide gives you a little taste of all of the programs that GoBiz team encompasses. And first and foremost is our California Business Investment Services, or what many of you may know as CalBiz. And this is where we offer things like incentive navigation to help companies and businesses understand the types of tax credit programs and/or grant programs or incentive programs that are available for businesses here in California. We also have site selection services for those companies that are looking to expand or grow in California. We offer permit assistance. As we all know, at the local, county, state level, there are several steps to go through as it relates to permits, and so we have a specialist team that is in place to help those businesses navigate that permit requirement. We also have an international team that is responsible for helping to promote California's products externally and internationally, but also for those companies that are internationally based looking to bring their business into California. So it's a two-way dialogue that we have. Really important part of GoBiz is our Cal-OSBA, or Office of Small Business Advocate. This group is in place to help with small businesses, whether it's through loan guarantee programs or connections to additional resources that the state offers, technical assistance. A big proponent and supporter of small businesses comes out of our Cal-OSBA office. We have a ZEV team that's in place. As we all know, the state has a target for zero emissions, and we've got a team that's in place to help with implementation of funding for infrastructure implementation around zero emission vehicles. We have our Cal Competes tax credit, which is our flagship program that many of our large companies and small businesses in California have applied for and received their tax credit. We have our Community and Local Equity Grants program, which has a focus on those communities looking to provide some assistance for resilience around cannabis impacts and along the way. Our California Film Commission is here in GoBiz, and our iBank. If many of you may be familiar with our iBank, this is our loan guarantee program. And then Visit California, while it falls under the GoBiz team, it does, as you all know, it does operate under its own commission and with its own governance structure, but it does fall under our team as a part of the California state government. So moving forward, I just wanted to share a little bit about what outdoor recreation consists of when we start talking about economic impact. And a few years ago, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, did create an outdoor recreation satellite account, or what we know as an ORSA account, specific to our recreation impact here in the United States. Previously to this BEA account being formed, recreation was lumped into a variety of different sectors, and it might have been lumped into agriculture, it may have been lumped into tourism. It was cut across a variety of sectors. But a few years ago, through the advocacy of many interested stakeholders in the outdoor recreation industry, BEA did form its own satellite account. So we now have tracking mechanisms to account for the economic impact of recreation in the United States. When this account was set up, there was a variety of activities that are included in it, and this slide represents many of those activities that are counted. So it could be everything from fishing, it could be our snow activities, I mean, it could be hunting and shooting, and it could be the apparel and accessories and sales of all of that. So it's a broad accounting of the economic activity around outdoor recreation. And we go very specifically into the impact that we see here in the United States. And so we'll go to this next slide, which will talk a little bit about how big this economy is here in the United States. This is a 2020 analysis coming out of that BEA account that I just referenced. And here you can see that outdoor recreation contributed $374 billion to the United States, the GDP of the United States. And we can compare that to car manufacturing, to air transportation, to the performing arts, to oil and gas. Recreation is big business, and it has the opportunity to have significant impact at the federal, state, and local levels. This next slide will take a little bit of a deeper dive into that economic impact, and very specifically how much this industry accounts for the GDP here in the United States. 1.8% of the overall GDP. There's 4.3 million jobs that are provided through this sector, as well as 2.9% of our total wages and salaries throughout the United States. In this slide, you can see by the sector, the gray area shows you how this compares to industry sector, how it compares to other sectors such as manufacturing, such as wholesale trade, such as professional services. When we go over to the right side of the screen, you can see where the GDP activity in 2020 overall, a significant part of it comes from our apparel and accessories, the sale of all of the, if you will, activities, toys, the boots that we wear, the equipment that we use is a significant part of this economic impact. So this is significant for the United States. We can go into the state of California very specifically and look at the impact that outdoor recreation has in California. And again, this is 2020 data that we'll look at in this next slide that will tell us the GDP impact of outdoor recreation in the state. And again, this is coming out of BEA, so we're looking at a $44.5 billion value-added contribution to the California GDP, and it's 1.5% of the state's GDP. California, with this data, ranked first as it relates to the value added, the amount. The percentage that we look at, 1.5% of our GDP here in California, might show up as a little bit less than some of our other states that we might be familiar with, where you have states like Montana and Colorado who are truly really dependent on outdoor recreation, and you'll see their percentage of GDP at a higher percentage in the 2s and 3s. But this California, with the amount at 44.5 billion, we rank first in GDP contribution throughout the other 50 states that are calculated. Additionally to that, here in California, we calculate almost 488,000 jobs that are linked to the outdoor recreation industry, and we show our wage and salary 2.8% contribution coming out of the outdoor recreation sector. So it is big business here in California, and it speaks to the private industry, but it also speaks to local communities and revenues that local communities receive as a result of folks that are either purchasing in their communities, purchasing the equipment and the apparel, etc., or those that are choosing to visit those communities where there's abundant outdoor recreation access, or there's assets that people are interested in visiting. So we see recreation industry impact at all levels throughout the state of California. Finally, on this last slide, I just want to leave this with you as we start to talk about some of the impacts that we have here that the outdoor recreation industry has here in California. We talk a little bit. There's tourism. Recreation obviously drives our tourism industry. There's residents that move into an area because of access to these outdoor recreation assets that are found throughout the state. We see small businesses that start to develop and grow as a result of the outdoor recreation activity, whether it's things like bike shops, or whether it's coffee shops, or whether it's outfitters and guides. These are small businesses that start up as a result of that outdoor recreation asset in those areas. We have things like tax revenue that is generated for local communities and at the county level as well, and the state level. And then we start to talk about the quality of life and the fact that having and investing in your outdoor recreation infrastructure leads to a quality of life that is desirable, and leads to a healthier lifestyle, and leads to an opportunity for folks to experience the outdoors in an abundant way. So this is how outdoor recreation contributes to our economy just through a variety of sectors. And then this last slide, we want to just plant this seed with you as we look into what can be done. And I took this quote from Pitt Grew, who is the director of the Utah Office of Outdoor Recreation. And I think this speaks to all of your experiences and the opportunities that are in front of all of you. But when we start to think about it, it takes people, it takes an opportunity for someone to run with to help communities enhance and or expand their outdoor recreation economy. It takes someone to start to build it and to champion it and to pursue it and to communicate with the local elected leaders. But it really does take that person or persons. My colleagues today are going to talk about some individual efforts that they've been involved in as locals and as initiative drivers, if you will, to enhance their outdoor recreation experience. And then later on too, we'll have an opportunity to talk about some tools and some grants and funding opportunities and resources that you have access to help as you want to look at outdoor recreation growth in your respective communities. Melissa, thanks for that.
Great, thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate you giving us kind of the big picture overview of what this looks like in California. Just a couple of quick reminders for the folks on the line. If you have questions, feel free to drop those into the questions box at any point in time. We are tracking those. And one thing I forgot to mention is that we will also be distributing the slide deck as well as the recording to all of you on the line, as well as anybody who registered for today's webinar. So my apologies for not mentioning that sooner, but definitely you will have access to all of this content after today's presentation. So up next, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Gardner, who's a supervisor in Mono County. Bob?
Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead and move the slides. I want to pick up right up where Dana left off, pick up and talk about something that we've done in Mono County, the Eastern Sierra Dispersed Camping Collaboration. And you see on the slide there, the summary overall of it. And I'm not going to, there's a lot of detail on these slides. You can look at them later, so I won't go over all of these. But I want to talk about this one, and then I'll talk about a little bit about some pledge programs later as some examples. This was an effort last year that we started and are continuing this year to address the whole issue of dispersed camping. And my concern was we had a lot of people complaining about it. Campfires out in the wilderness, campfires in the front area, and trash and sanitation issues. And my concern was I was tired, honestly, about the complaints and thought, okay, what are we going to do about it? And so we got everybody together and put together this whole initiative. And it really is that word in there in the third under current effort, a coalition of the willing coming together for triage. And that's what happened. We started out with literally a Zoom call just like this with about 65 people. And we said, we are not going to talk about the problem. We're going to talk about how we're going to fix it. And out of that came the 5 task forces you see below: education, mapping, stewardship, infrastructure, enforcement, and policy. And each of those was headed by, as Dana suggested, a champion, somebody in the community who stepped up. Sometimes they were county employees, sometimes they were simply volunteers or nonprofits. But it was basically an effort then that unfolded and moved across the time. Next slide, please. To go over each one quickly, the first one, education, really ended up in our Camp Like a Pro program, which has been a major marketing effort to basically encourage people to behave, to act responsibly in the Eastern Sierra, whether it's in a campground, whether it's in the backcountry, whether it's out camping in a dispersed area. We focused on a lot of messaging, looked at a lot of different things. You'll see some overlap here. This is like some of the pledge programs you're going to see, but you'll see that it focuses, go to the next slide, it gets in more detail. It focuses on specifics. You prepare before you go out. Here's what you do in terms of your campsite selection. Here's what you do in terms of mapping, campfire focusing skills, pooing, in terms of waste and going to the bathroom in the wilderness and in campgrounds. And then it had a lot of information in terms of places you can get information that of course right now is a big deal in terms of people really having access to social media. So the education piece was really getting a catchy phrase, Camp Like a Pro, and then putting out information, cards, flyers. Somebody said the other day, I know we're succeeding because I saw a child with a Camp Like a Pro sticker on the back of their backpack. So we've been able to get that out there. People, we like to think, can't go into a store or a visitor center in the Eastern Sierra without seeing a Camp Like a Pro information. The next one was the mapping. Go to the next slide. We had a whole issue of terms of just people knowing where they could camp on a dispersed basis. You can camp a lot of places, most places, but not everywhere, especially in developed area. So we developed a website where you could actually go and determine real quickly, oops, I'm not in an area where I can disperse camp. And that was huge. And making sure that it was coordinated with all our federal agency partners, the U.S. Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, and others in the state, certainly the state parks. And so that the camping areas that could be used were consistent. And that was very important. And then eventually we had a great volunteer application from Esri that became available. So it was much easier to get on terms of an app on one's phone. Okay, go to the next one. The next task force was stewardship, and this is really getting out and getting volunteers coordinated to clean up trash, to basically go out and help work on trails, to disrupt and take apart fire rings in areas where they shouldn't be, especially when there's fire restriction. This one we aimed at having a calendar. So somebody said, I want to help out, I don't know what I can do. You can go to the calendar and say, well, we've got to clean up on this trail, or we're going to go out and take apart fire rings in this area next weekend. Basically work together to get people to have opportunities to go out and clean up and help and provide stewardship across the Eastern Sierra. Go to the next one. This next X1 was really infrastructure. And this was really the tangible part of it. We raised funds to rent dumpsters and porta potties to put in critical areas where people were likely to either throw out their trash or poop or do things that are not appropriate in the area, certainly of the forest or wherever. And so we did rent dumpsters. and rented porta potties and located them. I think it was about between 15 and 20 different locations, and we're continuing to do that through some grant funds we've received from the Sierra Nevada Conservancy and Caltrans. And so this was huge. Eventually, we want to hopefully get permanent facilities, but this was huge in terms of having the ability to actually provide infrastructure that would help address some of these issues in dispersed camping, and also some signage. Go to the next slide. Signage was also a big deal. People need to know. I mean, some of it is basic ignorance. So we'd say a sign, no camping, or a sign, no campfires here or there. And we got very specific in working with, again, our federal partners, federal and state partners, to develop and add signs in specific places so that people, the standard line is, oh, I didn't know. And this way says, no, there's a sign right there. There's a sign right there that really says it. So we really wanted to have more information tastefully done and appropriate, and so that there'd be much more information available when people are actually out camping. And then the last task force, go ahead. The last task force was enforcement and policy, because when all is said and done, if somebody's not behaving, someone's not following the specific code or requirements, then we do need to have a way to follow it. So we worked with our, again, federal and state partners and their law enforcement personnel, as well as our local sheriff and police department, and made it clear here's who you call, here's how to handle it, and here's how they'll be responsive. And that was some issues in terms of the ability to respond in certain places. But the bottom line was we had much more cooperation and a much better partnership across the agencies as far as what to do when something happens. And indeed, we had some tough areas where people come up from Los Angeles and they want to camp, and they don't want to be told at night that they have to leave. So it can be awkward. But we did have better communication and a better way to handle those types of situations to kind of keep everybody in better shape and get through those issues. So that was pretty much, go ahead, next slide. That was pretty much what we did last year. We're continuing it this year. As I say, we received grants this year from the Sierra Nevada Conservancy and Caltrans, and are moving on that to continue these things on a permanent basis. The next thing I'd like to do is just very quickly share some pledge programs that are similar efforts to get people to commit to better behavior in terms of responsible recreation. And
Great. Yeah, I'm going to turn over controls to you right now. Hopefully that pops up for you.
There we go. If I can get this out of the way. Nope. Let me see. I can't get to the.
We can see it. You just need to start the slideshow.
There we go. There we go. I just need to. Okay. The beginning. There we go. Okay. These are pledge programs. I'll go through this very, very quickly. There's 13 different pledge programs that are out there that different resort towns and areas have put together. I'm not going to go over all these 13, but you can go back and look at these if you'd like. I'm just going to mention 2 or 3 of them because I think they're, again, good examples of what areas have done to basically say this is what we want to do. Leave no trace, I think everybody's familiar with. Aspen one I want to focus on. There's 12 different items here, but they all are, I will do this, I will do this, I will do this. And they really focus on the area as well as the behavior. As it says, whether Aspen is my home sweet home or my home away from home, I will do these things. And the last thing I pledge to take care of this little place called Aspen. One of the nice things about this, it's sponsored by Aspen Chamber Resort Association, and you'll see they make a donation of $18.80, which is when Aspen was incorporated, and for everyone that signs the pledge. And so they ultimately match some of those donations and use it as a opportunity to raise funds. Bend has a similar one. I won't go through that one. Some traveler responsibility pledge. North Lake Tahoe has that. More focus on coming their way. The Mahoosic Way is one that is really interesting. It's from the Maine area, Bethel, Maine, Chamber of Commerce, and they have a lot of different. Again, they call it the Embrace Our Place. Bethel, Maine, Pledge for the Wild. This is one that several different communities use. You'll see there, they're all listed. These are ones, sort of a joint one that a lot of different ones use. The mountain, we'll go through that one, Adventure by Nature. Let's see, Tread Lightly. Tread Lightly focuses more on water and ATVs, and those are principles that they push. And this is one that, again, is a generally one that you can buy into. Pledge to Travel Green focuses more on climate issues. Is more based on the U.S. Travel Care Code. And that one is one that, for example, the University of Colorado Club sports team uses that pledge. British Columbia, won't go over that one. The Paradise Pledge, I want to kind of maybe wrap up with here. They are good in that they break it into four or five different areas. The first one, this is the area around Yellowstone in Montana. When exploring, I will do these 8 or 10 things. When on the river, I will do these 4 or 5 things. When camping, I will do these things. When in Yellowstone National Park, I will do these things. The Paradise one is sponsored by the Park County Environmental Council, and they put it together based on a lot of concerns they had over the years with people, not recreating responsibly. So these are all different ways that you can generate focus and interest in responsible recreation, which turns into certainly sustainable recreation, and really encourage people. The research shows that people don't just come into nature and recreation activities and say, oh, I'm going to behave. They ultimately need to reflect. They need to focus. And so these pledges help them focus not only on their role as a visitor or a tourist, but on their role as a visitor to a community and being part of a community. So I think they can be very useful as examples. The Yellowstone one is sponsored by the park. Thank you. That's pretty much my spiel. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Bob. And for all of the attendees on the line, we will, again, be sharing this presentation with you so you can have all of those examples. We wanted to make sure we had a lot of diversity in those examples, but we could have had a whole presentation just on pledge programs, as you can see. So we wanted to give you some highlights, and then we'll share more information in that follow-up email. We're going to have John come up next, but Bob, we have one question for you from somebody in the Bay Area who loves the example of Camp Like a Pro. Are you familiar with any similar programs in other parts of the state or in the Bay Area, for example?
I'm not. I mean, other than some of the pledge programs that I've got there, I'm really not in California. There's that one in Tahoe, but in terms of Camp Like a Pro, we pretty much kind of were carving out a niche there. Some of those were based on like some principles, as you can see, that are universal. But in terms of something specific that's really marketed as Camp Like a Pro, that's I'm not familiar with much else. So we have had a whole lot of questions and inquiries about it.
Fantastic. Yeah. So if that's your question, I bet Bob would be happy to chat with you more about how they got the program set up, or could refer you to some of his colleagues in Mono County to give you more information about how maybe to get one started in the Bay Area.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to hold the rest of the questions until we get through John's presentation. So John, I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter now. Hopefully you'll see this pop up. Did you see that prompt, John, or do you want me to run things? Oh, you're muted. John, you're muted.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, and we can see your screen.
Good deal. Yeah, just some technical issues over here. So great presentations from both Dan and Bob, and I'm going to focus a little bit on creating the connective tissue between the great things that are happening in the state and or the federal government and the kind of local efforts that Bob just talked about, and how we do this through collaboratives and how we do this through engaging with state policy and state recommendations. So the first thing is I'm just going to touch on something called the Eastern Sierra Sustainable Recreation Partnership. You can see the descriptor here. This is a public-public partnership that was set up primarily between tribes and the local governments and the federal governments. The 3 counties region where I live, Alpine, Mono, and Inyo County, 90% of the landscape is managed by the federal government. So we needed to set something up so we could effectively communicate with each other and coordinate all kinds of activities, most of this stuff specifically around sustainable outdoor recreation, which drives our local economies. You can see here the names of the various agencies that have indicated they want to sign on to an MOU. We work under a non-funded challenge cost share agreement right now. But for all of you who are in areas that involve the U.S. Forest Service, this effort came out of an update to the Inyo National Forest Management Plan called the Eastern Sierra Recreation Collaborative that was working between 2014 and 2016. Through that collaborative, sustainable recreation was identified as a key part of their new management plan. So that's where this effort came out of. Our meetings typically start off with a series of introductions. We welcome supervisors from neighboring counties, but we also spend some time going through the changing roles and staffing of the various Forest Service units. Any of you all who are working with Forest Service units understand that they do rotate in and out. They come and they go, and we need to spend some time just introducing everybody to who the new faces are. We recently had a new superintendent who was named to the Manzanar National Park, the National Monument. So that was an interesting thing we had to do there. Top of mind recently has been fires, wildfire. We all know, I think we have some ideas what that's all about. And we track local fires. This is a fire that's over on the west side of the Sierra. A lot of smoke was coming over from a fire in Yosemite. But we're also watching all the fires throughout the state because this has effects on all of us. We provide updates on the McKinney fire, what kinds of things are happening up there. We also track the literature to the degree that exists, articles in the LA Times, articles in the San Francisco Chronicle, other papers, other academic treatises, so we can all be a better informed region about what it is that we're dealing with. Recreate Responsibly California, yes, they have a chapter in California. They've shared some great information about how to, work in that interface between sustainable recreation and wildfire. We share things with them. We also share what's happening in the federal government. So recently, the head of the U.S. Forest Service, a guy named Randy Moore, who used to be the head of Region 5 here in California, they published some updates to their challenge cost share agreements that now longer require matches for challenge cost share agreements. Good information to get out to our various partners because that makes it easier to partner with federal agencies. We share things coming out of the White House. The Biden-Harris administration is working on equitable outdoor recreation opportunities. Give folks links to this, give them the information that's happening up on the federal side. And certainly this summer we've been tracking what's been happening with heat and flooding and all the rest of it, which are the direct manifestations of climate change. This is climate change made real. So we try to localize this, and this has specific implications of something called Mono Lake. I'm sure you're all pretty aware of Mono Lake and what's happening out there. But this has all kinds of regional implications as climate change happens, how it starts to affect the natural resources in our area. So then we reach out and we say, well, OPR, the state of California, is launching a $250 million grant program focused specifically on climate change. And those grants are going to be coming out probably in February or so of this year. We share this with our group, with all the federal partners, state partners, local government, and all the rest of it. In the Eastern Sierra, we have done a vulnerability assessment that's focused specifically on the sustainable recreation economy that drives our region. And we're looking to bring that forward and hopefully to get some funding from the state to help implement some of the recommended actions that are in that vulnerability assessment. We also track things that are happening across the state that may have implications to our region. And some of you may be familiar, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, but the Sierra Institute has started to work on large landscape scale. They used to call them a block grant program, but it looks like it's heading to being a landscape scale investment program where, and this is coming out of the Wildfire Resilience Task Force, and you can see the geographies, the types of geographies the state is looking at to start spending many, many tens of millions of dollars to deal with wildfire treatments, and also to be mindful of the economies in small rural communities and counties that are dependent on the activities that happen in the forest. Big things are happening with this. The Sierra Nevada Conservancy board meeting is coming up in September, and they're going to have a very specific presentation on this topic. And I would encourage anybody who's interested to follow up. We can get you the information on that. But you can see how this all tiers from local priorities to Forest Service state priorities and then into regional priorities. And there's very important and very active work happening on the state now to really identify the regions and start working regionally. This is all rolling up into something we're focused on, which is the Wildfire Resilience Task Force, which I hope you're all familiar with, and we can talk more about that later if you're not. And this task force, you can see some folks up here. This is Jennifer Eberlein, who's head of Region 5 in the Forest Service. Wade Crowfoot, head of the Natural Resources Agency. Stacy Corliss, who was until recently the chair of RCRC. Patrick Wright, the lead staff person. And you can see that they've been working on this for the last year or so to align regional efforts with state and federal priorities. The state, this task force is putting a lot of effort, a lot of time and money into regionalizing and working regionally across the state. Then as part of the ESSRP, we go into our local sort of regional discussions, state funding for projects, updates on our tribal consultation, how we're doing, bringing tribes into this effort. We have an Eastern Sierra Council of Governments over in this region. That is a joint powers authority, which is being very useful in a number of different projects, update on Camp Like a Pro and things like that. And I'm going to shift a little bit into the second topic I want to talk about, which is focused really directly on the California Wildfire Resilience Task Force. And this is a presentation that we shared with Butte County last week. We also shared this with a number of recreation and wildfire stakeholders on the efforts of was something called the Sustainable Recreation, the CalRec Vision Key Working Group. So this is a working group that's been established by the Wildfire Task Force to help implement a couple of the elements of their action plan that live right at that intersection of sustainable recreation and wildfire. Co-led by Jim Bacon from Region 5, who's the head of all recreation in Region 5, along with Angela Avery, who, as many of you I'm sure know, is the executive officer, the chief executive officer of the Sierra Nevada Conservancy. And so the California Task Force, they have a charge to develop and implement an interagency framework for establishing healthy and resilient forests and communities, which is really important for this seminar and this discussion, this webinar. The integration of communities in with wildfire, especially those communities that are recreation dependent. They have an action plan, and this group, this key working group, is delivering, I think, 2 of the identified elements, tasks, key actions from that action plan. And this is being convened by something called the CalRec Vision, which produced a vision paper about a year ago and was tasked by leadership of the task force to deliver those 2 key actions, again, at the intersection of sustainable recreation and wildfire. It may be a little small for you to see, but these are the folks who are members of this key working group. Agency representatives from everything from NOAA to the Park Service to LA County Department of Parks and Recreation, Recreate Responsibly California, Forest Service, Sierra Nevada Conservancy, California State Parks. A great group. They've been well engaged now for over a year. And what they've been doing is they've been drafting this joint strategy between the U.S. Forest Service and the state of California for a series of goals and key actions to implement, again, at that intersection of communities, especially recreation dependent communities, and the wildfire program that the state is investing a lot of money in and will be rolling out now and pretty shortly. This is a list. These are just the titles of the 5 main goals. Everything from strengthening sustainable outdoor recreation in California to promoting the health and safety of all Californians, diversity of recreation experiences, and supporting economies that enhance sustainable recreation, especially those communities that are dependent upon outdoor recreation on public lands. This joint strategy will be presented to the task force, the California Wildfire Resilience Task Force, on September 27th in Grass Valley. Would love to see some of you there. If you've got any questions, we'll have a chance to talk about this a little bit. And here's some information in case you want to jot this down. We can put these things in the chat as we go through the webinar later. But it's very exciting work to be working in that space in between what's happening on the ground and the initiatives and the funding and the great ideas are coming out of both the state of California and the federal government. So thank you for that. And I believe I'm done. And I will turn this back over to those who know what they're doing.
Great, thank you, John. I will take back over controls here.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, we do want to just go into a panel discussion. So get all of our panelists back online here. Great, perfect. And while we're going through this, obviously, if you have questions as an attendee, please again continue to drop those into the questions box, and we will get to those as well. But we just wanted to dig into some of the topics that our panelists have already started to discuss during their short presentations this morning. So I think I'm going to start with a question around stakeholders and collaboration, kind of building on what John was just talking about with the COG and the partnership and collaborative that he is part of. So there's so many stakeholders in this space. You talk about the federal government, the state government, obviously our local partners, tribal entities, nonprofits. So how are you identifying the key partners that really need to be involved in these conversations? And then what advice do you have to our local agencies on the line that are looking to build some of those partnerships and make sure that they have the right folks in the room and are having those conversations in a productive way? John, maybe we can start with you. How did you all identify the stakeholders to involve in that collaborative process?
It's an excellent question. It starts with the obvious, which is who is managing the landscape that you have an interest in. And so for our ESSRP, the Sustainable Recreation Partnership, federal land managers, state agency, Caltrans is part of it, counties, and the incorporated jurisdictions. Those parties are not going anywhere. They're going to be there for the long term, as long as the long term is going to exist these days. Who knows what's going to happen next? But you bring those folks together because they all have an interest in just starting with information sharing. You can then get into authorities and doing projects and all the rest of it, but at least you got to get everybody talking to each other. We found also that the audience, the recreation audience that comes in from out of the region, it comes and it goes. It comes and it goes. They're up to have a good time and to experience nature and do those kinds of things. And then for NGOs, nonprofits, advocacy organizations, they have a place, but typically their place may be in a NEPA process, in a CEQA process, maybe bringing some capacity, but you want to start with who's actually managing the landscape that's going to be the focus of your collaborative.
Great. Dana, anything you'd add to that from a state perspective? So a little bit different lens than maybe our local partners.
Well, no, and I appreciate it, and John's absolutely right. You know, those that are managing those recreation assets that folks want to engage with and either enhance or improve have to start with those that are managing it. I would just also add that there's opportunities to look beyond who we might call, you know, those that regularly show up. And what we're starting to find out, particularly as the state launches its Community Economic Resilience Fund program, or the SURF program, where there are multiple regions throughout the state that are going to be collaborating, that you need to have a kind of a concerted effort to reach out to those that may not traditionally show up or may not always show up. And you want to start to think about their perspectives that can bring to this table as well. And so the SURF program in particular is very focused on reaching out to those underserved communities, or most importantly, underrepresented communities, and an opportunity to directly connect with them and invite them in and go to be a part of this much broader collaborative process. But it does start with who's managing and overseeing that asset, and making sure that you identify who's not at the table and invite them to come and join you.
No, that's a great point, and something that we've found success with in other community engagement efforts outside of this topic and others, but is in really engaging those community partners, thinking about your nonprofit community, your community-based organizations that may have those connections into those underserved populations, or the folks that may not be at the table regularly. And so that's just something to consider for outreach efforts, and as you're pulling together stakeholder groups to really be thinking. I just love that point, Dana, about who's not at the table, who's not engaged, and how do you fill those gaps. Bob, anything you'd add to the conversation around stakeholder engagement and how you identify those folks?
Yeah, I just say, you know, for our dispersed camping effort, we really did make an effort to send an email out to everybody we could think of, just what has been said, our federal state partners, local businesses, chambers, the nonprofit groups, the environmental nonprofit groups, individuals that we knew were concerned about these issues. And out of that came, you know, the 65 people that were originally on the Zoom call. But we made an effort to be as inclusive as possible. Tribal groups, others that we might not have thought of or might not think that they had exactly the same interest. But it's a matter of really, if collaboration is going to be real and is going to result in progress, you have to be inclusive and put up with what's going to be a challenge in terms of a lot of people on a call or in a room or whatever. That can't be the excuse that it's too large. You have to reach out and include everyone. And always there are great surprises where somebody steps up and says, I want to be a part of this. And we had a lot of that in terms of the groups and people that stepped up and did a lot of work.
Oh, fantastic. Any other advice for folks about how to make the collaborative work? It's definitely important to identify who's not in the room, how to get those folks aware of the process, but then the real work starts, right? In terms of how do you get a bunch of diverse stakeholders to work together? John, it looked like you wanted to jump in there.
Well, I think in this space, as in all sort of public sector endeavors, persistence and a credible process is absolutely important. If you're going to have a monthly meeting, you have a monthly meeting. If you're going to put on a nice presentation, put out an agenda, you make your nice presentation, you put out the agenda. That type of momentum tends to build upon itself. And I think to Bob's point about once you start settling on a project, which Camp Like a Pro was a project, then you've got all the contemporary tools of technology to reach out to a much broader audience, for volunteers, for all kinds of people you hadn't thought about, to bring them to a table to actually do something and get something done. But I think just the basics of public engagement, good facilitation, good convening, and good information sharing is a great place to start.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to that it's about some transparency also, so that then invokes communication and how you are sharing with those that may not be at your table what your activities are, what your steps are, what the project has been that's identified. And so there is that ability to, tag on to what John said, use those information sources to communicate with those that aren't participating. Here's what we're doing. Here's how we're doing it. Here's how you can engage. But there is that opportunity to be very transparent and be very open with communication to share what you're doing.
The other thing I would just add from a community engagement experience as well is to start early, start building those relationships before you think you need them, so that you're not just engaging folks for what we call, just-in-time partnerships, that you really are trying to create those authentic partnerships and be proactive about that. So then you have that infrastructure at least partially built when you're going to some of these processes. One question that I'm sure a lot of the folks have on the line is about funding. So these programs are fantastic, and it sounds like they're definitely making some headway, but I know local government budgets are very strapped. So what are the funding opportunities around this? Are there grant funds? Are there other funds that you all are accessing or know about that might be available to our local government partners on the line?
Yeah, I'm going to start, and I know Bob and John have all tapped into various sources too, but I'm going to just start first with, it's not always about funding. Perhaps there's always the technical assistance opportunities that maybe it's, to bring in folks that can help bring some capacity and some assistance to the local area. So a couple that come to mind that around recreation in particular that California has, we've seen a couple of California communities really benefit from, is coming out of the US EPA and their recreation economy for rural communities, or their RERC. We've got 3 communities here in California that have received this technical assistance, and it's happening in Guadalupe, California, small community here on the Central Coast. It's happening up in Wairika, and it's also happening in Quincy. And those respective communities applied for that technical assistance. They put in the application, and their focus is around enhancing their local recreation assets, as well as their downtown, their main streets, their economic vitality. So EPA is coming in with advisors to help them create plans and strategies for projects that they want to implement around. Then I would also add the National Park Service has their rivers, trails, and their RTCA, their rivers, trails, and conservation assistance. Once again, technical assistance to come in and help with your local folks plan, coordinate, convene, identify projects to work collaboratively on. So it's not always about funding per se, but there is a lot of technical assistance that's available out there. And then, we're tracking California State Parks, in particular, a variety of grant programs that they offer throughout the fiscal year. The budget's just been approved. The state's getting ready to put these programs out. If you are not subscribed to the California Grants portal, I would encourage you to do so today. That portal allows you to filter the type of grant that you may be seeking, the type of project and or program that you're looking to implement, and you would be notified of any of the state agencies that may have a grant opportunity that aligns with what your needs are. So by all means, California Grants Portal is an excellent source because it cuts across all of the state agencies, and when there are grants coming out, you can subscribe and be notified of all of those. And then we are very actively watching what's coming out of the federal government as it relates to some of the larger bills that have been passed recently. The Inflation Reduction Act, we know, is going to have some funding coming out here. We know that the IIJA Act has got some funding that's coming out here. And then the big one that we keep an eye on, again, around recreation, is the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And that is also if you will, administered through our California State Parks Division. And so that's another funding program, funding opportunity for in either enhancement or implementation of recreation infrastructure projects that you've got in your respective communities that you want to pursue. So that's kind of an initial start. I know John and Bob, they tap into additional sources as well. My former agency, Sierra Nevada Conservancy, is a significant one because of the support that it provides to those Sierra Nevada-based communities around, recreation and tourism, actually. So that's a start.
Fantastic. Hannah, can I ask you to put the link to the grants portal in the chat? And then we'll also make sure to include that link in the follow-up email as well, so that interested folks on the line can make sure that they're signed up there. But I do want to give John and Bob a chance to talk about any other funding sources they've been tapping into for local projects.
Bob, I'll lead on this a little bit. You have to start with whatever local capacity you got, and a lot of times that ain't much. But I think to Dana's point, I mean, you can get organized, you can start doing things, and to your point as well, you can start getting those partnerships and those relationships in place so that they're there when you need them. That's really what's happened to us with this Eastern Sierra Sustainable Recreation Partnership. It was formed coming out of land management planning for the Indian National Forest. As soon as we got things kind of up and rolling, COVID hit. And it was indispensable to have that form as you went through a couple of years of COVID, and campgrounds are going to be open or forests going to be open. What are we going to do with all this stuff? That was really important. But now with this flood of money and opportunity coming out of the state and coming out of the federal government, it's critical to have that kind of a partnership in place. I will say that it's nice that the state of California has discovered rural California in many ways. There's a lot of programs, 30 by 30 nature-based solutions for climate change, the wildfire work that is going to happen on landscapes that are managed principally by the federal government or take place in rural communities with very, very little capacity and very, very little bandwidth to do any of this stuff. Just writing a lot of these grant applications is, I mean, I'm sure it's hard for everybody, but it's especially difficult when you have one person in a planning department in a county or in a town. And in order to get the kind of workforce needs that the state is talking about for wildfire work, 30 by 30 work, nature-based solutions for climate change work, this starts getting into issues about housing and rural economic development that frankly the state has been a little bit behind the curve on all this. So you can get by with your local resources in this moment and you could advance your needs, but to really engage with this stuff and to really be effective, there's going to have to be some real resources coming out of the state to make this stuff possible, or the whole rural landscape is just going to be sort of overlooked and forgotten, which is not consistent with the goals and the policies of the state. But in my experience recently, the last 6 months, the last couple of years, there's a real need for some capacity building out here in rural California to be able to actually really engage with these opportunities.
I guess if I could just hop onto that, John, and make the point in terms of our own experience. Several years ago, in terms of Mono County concerns with supporting our recreation economy, and certainly working with John and others on the town council in Mammoth Lakes, we realized we've got to put our own resources, we've got to put some skin in the game. And so we created a joint position, a joint recreation coordinator shared between the county and the town. and created that and devoted resources to that. That was us saying, we'll put some money on the table. Indeed, we need to build our own capacity to work on these programs, to pursue grants and do these things, hopefully anticipating additional resources from the state, but we're willing to certainly put our own resources on the table. That has since grown to where both the town and now the county, we have separate recreation capacities and resources devoted to it. And that's separate. Everybody has a Parks and Recreation department, but this is different. We both had those. This is different. This is a recreation coordinator, manager that deals with a lot of these issues we're talking about, not keeping the parks going, not hiring the lifeguards or handling the typical traditional parks and recreation issues. These are different issues. And that has grown and will continue to grow. But I guess I raise that because if there isn't support and a commitment to devoting some local resources to some of these issues, there's going to be trouble down the road in terms of really being able to do it. It's like a lot of things. At a certain point, we have to decide what our priorities are and where we will generate. And sometimes that may be looking at where we generate revenue, new revenue, or whether we carve out resources that we already have. But that's a hard discussion that you can't put off. Ultimately, it's going to have to be faced down the road in terms of creating local capacity to then leverage additional federal and state capacity.
No, it's definitely true. Trying to find that balance. You have to be having your local resources as well as coupled with potentially state funding or other federal opportunities or things like that. And the state is funding a lot of money into some of these climate programs and things like that. But John, I think your point is well taken that in a lot of the rural parts of the state, they are struggling to even, complete grant applications or have all the pieces in place to really access those funds. So a lot of balance to be found there, but appreciate the thoughts and comments around all of the different components that go into funding these programs and moving the needle on some of these projects.
If I could just add one thing on the Cal Recreation front, that was an effort to really make sure that sustainable recreation in California is aligned with the policy objectives of the state of California. It's a very intentional, very specific effort. And those policy objectives are aligned with funding. And so sustainable recreation has a role to play in the wildfire treatments and issues happening in the state. It has a role to play in the climate mitigation, the climate solutions. So this is it's not coming out of left field. It's directly aligned with the stated policy objectives of the state of California and the funding that comes with it.
Well, that's a fantastic segue into the next question that I have. We've talked a little bit about particularly wildfire resilience, but some of the other climate threats and challenges that our local governments are facing. And can you guys speak a little bit to how agencies might be able to integrate or pair the recreation and sustainable recreation conversation we're having here with some of those climate resilience and adaptation conversations that are happening? Because again, that's related to the funding that's coming through, particularly from the state of California, but also the impacts. I don't know if you can bifurcate the two. You've got increased camping that may be leading to, wildfire or other environmental challenges. So do you all have any thoughts on how to maybe leverage those things or integrate those two things to make more progress on both fronts?
Yeah, I'll start, and I know both Bob and John, are in this too, but I'm going to just start with it's showing up to begin with. Most recently, we had John referenced the 30 by 30 initiative that the state had, Pathways to 30 by 30. They hosted a variety of listening sessions throughout the state of California when they were putting together their strategy. When the initial draft came out, recreation kind of really wasn't really in the mix, and it took folks actually providing comments, being in those listening sessions to share, here's how recreation matters to our community, here's the value that recreation brings to our local economy and to our workforce. We want to see recreation integrated into the state's planning around Pathways to 30 by 30. Another example has to do with the current fifth climate assessment that the state is going through. And once again, it's about climate impact. The question is, don't forget to include recreation into that discussion and to actually place a value on the recreation infrastructure that we have in the state, and being able to calculate that into this 5th climate assessment is going to be a part of, the strategy that they're going to come out with for implementation. So for us, it starts with recreation does belong at the table. Let's not think that it doesn't. And in the context of wildfire, in the context of sea level rise, in the context of heat, all of these impacts that we're seeing here, recreation can come to the table, be a part of it, and raise its hand to say our assets, our infrastructure is in place and does align with those goals of the state. And here's what it means to our community. That's the part that I think sometimes is missing, is that the local voice in communicating up to the policy advisors what that value is to that local community as it relates to recreation. And I think that's the start of the local engagement with what's happening at the state level. Bring that type of information forward, bring that type of value to the discussion so that there's an awareness building around that. And that, I'll start with that. And I know, like I said, John and Bob have additions to that.
Well, I would just mention quickly, one of the things we've done on the wildfire side, which is certainly a part of resilience, is try to improve awareness and education about wildfire preparedness generally and wildfires. I've struggled with the fact, again, that there's been a lot of complaints about what's going on and how do they respond and when do they close the forest, and a lot of these sort of wildfire anxiety points. And so we created, starting in April, again, a Zoom presentation called the Citizens Wildfire Academy, which is a monthly session that goes on for 6 months. We've got 2 left. That is basically around topics on wildfire. First one was on the history of fire in the Eastern Sierra in California. There was one on fire ecology, and we bring in speakers that can say, here's the story, here's the situation. The one we just had last week was on defensible space and home hardening. And we have anywhere from 30 to 50 or plus people, and then they're recorded and available on a website, the Eastern Sierra Wildfire Alliance. And so that's an area to basically try to say, look, we have a recreation economy. We want to have a very strong tourism business support from our county and town. But basically, we've got to address the issue of wildfire that's hanging over all of us, and certainly an issue with our federal and state partners. And so this was an effort to educate and try to say, here's information you can get, and try to address some of that anxiety and make sure everybody's thinking that in terms of being, and they were aimed not only at residents, but certainly at visitors as well. So that's one specific initiative we've tried to pursue to try to link these things together and create more awareness.
And I think I'm going to drop something in the chat. I don't know if it will propagate out, but this goes to that CalRec Vision website. That, you look around in California. Well, where all these other states have an offices of outdoor recreation. Where's that in California? We don't have one. So what we're going to have to do, and Dana and I have been part of this CalRec Vision effort working with the Wildfire Resilience Task Force, is to get policy documents and guidance and direction into all of these really important initiatives happening on the state so that recreation will be there. We would hope that there's this really important meeting happening with the task force in Grass Valley that's coming up September 27th. There's going to be a big discussion from the Sierra Nevada Conservancy and the task force talking about setting up a landscape scale, a truly enormous geographical effort to start getting funding out to huge swaths of the state of California with, let's call them what they are, block grants. And hopefully this recreation strategy that we've been working on, that key working group is working on, will be integrated into that block grant program. So if you're in Butte County or Shasta County or Inyo County or Alpine County or any of the places with these huge, large federal landscapes, there will be a component of this block grant that talks about your sustainable recreation program so that funding can be available to help move these things forward. And I think that kind of work is going to be really, really important as we go down the line. And I'll leave it there. I'm sure there's more to talk about, but I dropped it in the chat. Hopefully folks can see it. September 27th, Grass Valley. And I can drop a link for that meeting as well.
Yes, please feel free. We'll get that out to the attendees.
Thank you.
We have a couple of questions from some folks in the audience, but again, if you guys have questions, please feel free to send them our way. Let's take one of these now. So we're talking about kind of state policies and programs a little bit and how that relates to some of these conversations. We've got a question around the organics legislation that I know a lot of local governments are grappling with right now. Is there any, I think particularly in connection to Bob, the program you were talking about with the camping and things like that, is there any way you're navigating that in terms of complying with organics laws as well? It's just another added layer of this. You were talking about, the garbage disposal and things like that. So just curious if there's any thoughts there.
Well, I would say, we had to work with Caltrans, and we had some issues where, we want to put a dumpster here. That's in the Caltrans right away. But we worked those out. We had Caltrans early on in the group, and many times they would say, we can do that. We can take care of that. We found that a lot of the agencies that sometimes perhaps would be an impediment, Fish and Game, Fish and Wildlife, a lot of times we're more quick to say, let us work on that. We'll help you. I do think a lot of what we pursued was let's do it and see what conflicts we hit, rather than agonize about worrying about conflicts. It isn't so much the permission forgiveness, but it's a little bit headed that direction in terms of just do it, get it going. There's a need in these days in dealing with any government operation that we can get bogged down and people get frustrated because it is complex, believe me. But that's not a reason not to move ahead. We move ahead, we focus on, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep our public lands clean and safe. And we're going to move ahead. And okay, we trip over a regulation, we trip over a law, we'll deal with that. And we go right to somebody and say, you're in the way right now, politely, but how can we do this? But not get dismayed by regulations and laws. They can be, there's exemptions, they can be changed, they can be reinterpreted. And I'm not saying to get, around them always, but that should not be a reason to not get the results we need. A lot of it is energy and frankly, focus to keep moving ahead. So that's what we did in both Camp Like a Pro and some of these other things, is we worked with the agencies that had those concerns and maybe altered our plans a little bit. We maybe moved the porta potty over 5 feet, or maybe we put a cover over it, or we did some things like that. But we still got it done. Those regulations are not a reason to not achieve progress, because regulations ultimately are aimed at protecting the environment or protecting something, and we need to understand perspective and be able to work with that.
John or Dana, anything you'd add on the organics front?
The only thing I would add is that, again, out in rural California, a lot of the regulations that come from the state require a certain amount of interpreting and to be done in good faith. And to be done in a way that's we'll try to find a way that something that maybe came out of Sacramento that we can adopt and adapt to rural situations. Very proud to be living in the state of California, very proud to be part of the California vision, but sometimes it takes a little tweaking around the edges to get things to work.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I think, there are programs added on afterwards to try and help communities with that compliance requirement. So those programs come on afterwards, and with the intent to get some assistance out there.
No, great. Another conversation I'd like to dig into a little bit more, and we talked about a little bit in some of your presentations around, Bob, you talked about signage and getting information out to the community. We've talked about kind of that stakeholder engagement and how do you reach into your community. But as it relates to Camp Like a Pro in particular and some of these other programs that we're talking about, it obviously requires a lot of information out to your communities and to the communities visiting your communities. So what are you all doing to share that information? Obviously, the signage is one component, but how are you getting that information out about how to be good stewards of the environment, how to engage in our recreational sites in a positive way with the community? What's working?
Well,
Go ahead, Gene. Okay, I would say I know at Camp Like a Pro, we've just sort of pursued flyers and stickers and social media and just sort of a flood of different ways with the consistent message of Camp Like a Pro, and then various levels of detail under. Whether it's a card that you can pick up that's small, whether it's a flyer that's in the on the counter in the visitor center or in a business, whether it's a sticker that can appear somewhere. But we've certainly tried to be, you know, thorough in terms of getting it out there. Consistency of the message is huge. I've struggled with very much. I don't believe in the Eastern Sierra. We need to market ourselves. People will come here. We can maybe focus on shoulder seasons and some things like that. But the reality is in the winter and the summer, people are going to come here. So we don't need to, our messaging doesn't need to show necessarily beautiful scenes of lakes and streams. Because I'm strafed by a helicopter. But as much as people at that lake enjoying themselves and behaving and being responsible. And so there's some messaging. I think I've always said I haven't had a lot of luck, but I've always thought it bothers me that we have a captive audience when people drive up Highway 395 to the Eastern Sierra. And there's a lot of billboards there. And I, you know, appreciate the fact that businesses will spend money on that, but why can't we have a billboard that says it's your public land, you know, make sure you take care of it just like you take care of your backyard, hopefully, and do some things like that. Be more creative in terms of billboards, be more with then obviously a link to a website. But we need to be consistently on the message and then be more creative in terms of how we get the message out. We can't do too much. There's a reason, I always say, there's a reason Madison Avenue gives you that commercial 10 or 12 times. We need to do the same thing.
Yeah, I'll just add too that it does start with that messaging, but it also starts with that pre-planning opportunity, because that speaks to where you're posting information and some of the links that were shared in the chat. The messaging that starts with those that are going to a website to find out more about the place they want to go visit. It starts with putting and setting expectations there for how people are going to visit and what people are going to expect to experience when they get to that destination and they get to your place. And I think that's our destination marketing organizations, of which many of our participants today have a DMO in your area. There's a reliance upon them to help carry that message forward to the visiting public in order to set that expectation. And you do it early in the process so that they understand, as they're making their plans to come visit, they understand how to recreate responsibly, what the expectations are of the local community, what are the resources that the local community has or doesn't have that they can tap into and access. And so it's really putting that message out often and early in that planning process. And Bob's got a great point too. You know, it's okay to establish expectations for the visitor and for those that are choosing to come to your community. It's okay to let them know how you value the place and how you expect that visitor to value the place the same way.
Yeah, and to add to this, I think Dana made a point a while ago that Bob just hit on again, which is that recreation is really about human beings on these landscapes. Recreation, well, you might think it's this particular activity. It's much more essential than that. It's about the human engagement and the human presence in this huge area that is the state of California. And it's an excellent point. You need to show the human beings in the landscapes. How are the human beings doing the right kinds of things? And, you know, break it out of the sector a little bit and get it out of just the recreation piece and say, look, this is how we as human beings engage with these unbelievable landscapes, and how do we do it responsibly, and how do we do it effectively, and how do we do it well. In the Eastern Sierra, with a grant from the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, we developed an entire outreach program to engage with the visitors, the millions of people coming up from Southern California. The base population in our region is what 35, 40,000 people, Bob, with a regular audience between 5 and 7 million people. We just don't have the capacity to put the kinds of programs together to do that. We've got a plan. We need to find some funding for it. But this goes back to that earlier comment about getting some resources from the state out into these areas to really start doing the fundamental task, which is engaging with these huge audiences. I mean, I don't know what the ratio is of 35,000 to 5 million, but it's a big number that I don't have the bandwidth to figure it out. But that's these are the numbers of people that we need to effectively engage with. We've got the tools to do it. We're gonna need some resources from the state to help us figure out how to make it happen.
Yeah, figuring out how to scale it, right?
We're ready to go. We've got all the stakeholders at the table. We've got a whole program, nice, pretty program all ready to go. We got a budget. We need some resources and we can make this stuff happen.
Yeah. I just want to hit on a couple of things that Bob said that I think are really key to this conversation. One is messaging. We talk about that a lot in local government world. I'm doing a lot of work in housing and land use right now, and if you want to talk about jargon and acronym central, that's where it is. So we need to get out of our heads as local government folks and really be connecting with the community. So messaging, Bob, I just want to underscore the importance of that. I appreciate you bringing that up. And then consistency in messaging too, which is something you all have been hitting on. And if you hear that message again and again and again, it's going to definitely resonate more than if it changes or if you only hear it once or in passing or something like that. And then the other thing that a lot of you have hit on is the diversity of methods that you are using to reach out. So a lot of standard communication channels around websites and newsletters and emails and social media. But I love the thinking outside of the box there a little bit. I know it hasn't happened yet, but the billboard idea, Bob, and just trying to figure out other ways to capture folks' attention instead of, just putting something on a website and hoping people find you. So thinking about ways to get that information into the hands of folks that really need it or want it. I was up in Mammoth Lakes or down in Mammoth Lakes a few weeks ago, and I saw the Camp Like a Pro stuff everywhere. So I think it's working, at least in your local communities. I almost picked up some of the stuff because I knew this webinar was coming, but just appreciate all of the efforts there. I do have just a few slides to close us out here since we're getting close to time. Let me get back to the slideshow here. We just wanted to share some additional resources with you all on some of the things that we really focus on. So we've been talking a lot about sustainable and resilient communities. So some things that we have from ILG's perspective are a sustainability best practices framework that go through a number of different things, policies and programs that local governments can put into place to move the needle on some of the things we're talking about around climate adaptation and resilience. I also want to give a quick plug to our Beacon program. So that's an award program, a peer networking program for cities, counties, and special districts. I'm really honoring the strides they're making to become more sustainable and resilient communities, energy efficiency, greenhouse gas reductions, and again, going back to the sustainability best practices. We've talked a lot about public engagement and community engagement here today too. I want to do a little shameless plug for our public engagement training coming up in October. This is a 2-day training for local government staff and officials to really embed public engagement into your processes. We've got a ton of information about the basics and a lot of things we mentioned this morning. And then on the leadership front, we also have a lot of information around how to be an effective board and council and things like that that really help underscore you being able to do these really innovative and important programs in your local government. Here's just how you can stay in contact with us. Again, we're a network of cities, counties, and special districts. So those are our social media handles, or definitely sign up for our newsletter if you're interested in learning more about our programs and resources. As I mentioned earlier, we will be redistributing the slide deck and materials as well as the recording of this webinar likely by the end of this week. So keep an eye out for an email on that front. And then I just want to get everybody's contact information up here. So if we didn't get to a question that you had or you want to follow up on any of the programs or things that we talked about today, please don't hesitate to reach out to the panelists or myself. I'm happy to connect you with any of those resources. So with that, I want to definitely thank my panelists this morning. It's not quite afternoon yet. And I also want to thank our partners at RCRC, the Rural County Representatives of California, for their partnership on this webinar and getting this information out to our local government partners. So with that, Dana, John, Bob, any final thoughts for our attendees?
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Yes,
And
I like that.
as I say at many meetings, if in doubt, just get on with it and then fix it. It's better to do something than nothing. Get on with it.
Make progress, right? Perfect. Okay, well, thank you all again, and thank you to our attendees for joining us this morning, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.